Hello everyone, this is Matthew.
And this is Paul again. Welcome back to Pleb Philosophers. Today, we also have a special guest, Zach.
Hello, everyone. I am Zach. Thank you there very much for having me.
Thank you for coming along.
Hey, no worries, no worries. So, Paul, what are we going to be discussing today?
All right. So, today is going to be about something we all love, or most of us at least, democracy. We're going to take a look at direct democracy versus representative democracy, or otherwise, as I like to call it, indirect democracy. And we'll talk a bit about new democracies versus some of the older ones in the past and where it came from. So, to take it away, Zach, what does democracy mean to you? Do you even know what it is?
I would say I definitely understand the modern way of doing it. In regards to the old way, it's something I've more recently been learning there
Mhm.
about, so there would be gaps in my knowledge. But to be short and easy to understand, it's basically the the masses or the people themselves have a say in the maintenance or governance of the state.
Yeah, okay. So it's the people having or playing a part in the governing of the country and
Yeah, whether
having,
that's
yeah.
electing representatives or directly voting on things that happen in the state, that kind of stuff. It's about the
Mm.
masses, the majority having a say.
Yeah, I'd say that fairly sums up with what I believe democracy is
Yeah,
Hmm.
pretty much
overall.
with me. Except that
Same with Matt.
I'm gonna nerd out a bit here. Democracy, which is in Greek, which translates to people power,
Mm.
power of the people.
Does it though? If I
Yeah,
fact check this, will you be right?
yeah, I'll be right. I
Say
looked it
you can
Oh,
up.
fact check. I do remember actually seeing that
Yeah,
translation as well.
I looked it up.
Um, whilst you fact check that, I'm getting up on good old Google.
people
The
rule.
definition. I suppose rule can be translated
To
a little
power.
bit differently to
Yeah.
power. But yes, the definition of democracy, as is online, is a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Okay,
Hmm.
there's two more definitions. A state governed under a system of democracy, which doesn't really explain what it is. And a third one, control of an organization or group by the majority of its members. I
Hmm.
think that third definition correlates a lot more to what you were saying before, Zach.
Hmm.
But yes, so that is the broad overview of what a democracy is. Now, more specifically, and I'll get into it now, direct democracy or pure democracy is a form of democracy in which the electorate decides on policy initiatives without elected representatives. Representatives as proxies. So the people can vote directly on certain types of issues without the need of someone to do or make those decisions on their behalf.
And
And
I
then
believe that'd be direct democracy.
that
Hmm.
is, yes, that is
Yeah.
direct democracy. Then of
Yeah.
course indirect is the opposite, where you have someone else making the decisions on behalf of the people.
Hmm.
So
So which do
yeah,
we prefer?
yeah. Now that we've
Yeah.
explained the definitions, what well, I mean, nowadays, today, Matthew, do you know what do you think we currently have in Australia?
In
What type of
Australia,
democracy?
ours is a bit more indirect. We get a representative to do all the thinking for us and all
Yeah.
that shit, which vote them in, do the thing, so it's more indirect. I
Managing the
believe
country.
in direct, however. I like to know what sort of issues are being in play.
Hmm.
Like, there could be like an economic crisis. I want to vote into that, Yes or no?
I mean,
I don't want someone else silly or nilly willy fucking vote doing the shit for me.
I say now. I'm gonna just ask this now, Matthew. Have you ever run a country before, or a business like a
In
really big?
games, yes.
Oh, okay, okay. So we have a lot of the
IRL, not
no,
so
no, not
much.
so much.
Mm,
Excuse me there,
Okay.
Paul.
Yes, sir.
In regards to indirect versus like direct democracies, I do think the important or best way of doing it would be the happy middle, or what's known as a semi-direct democracy, which there are elements of a little bit in places like Germany and I'm pretty sure Denmark, but mostly in Switzerland.
Mhm.
Have you looked into how the Swiss do government?
I have briefly taken a look the other day, as
Hmm.
to how they vote. It seems they have a lot more direct democracy on a local level for
Yes.
making local decisions. I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe that translates to the national scale, though, or at
Mm-hmm.
least not for most things.
It seems to me the theory there behind it is for more important statewide decisions in a hypothetical nation that follows like semi-direct democracy. You have the people do it. So for maybe decisions on war or maybe economic issues or even maybe building a road or two in the local area. But for the day-to-day things, that's where your elected representatives can come in,
Hmm.
those kind of people who can kind of deal with the little tiny things here and there, which everyone doesn't need to vote for every little thing, because then it
Yeah.
gets tiring for the average person.
Well, and I
Mm.
think even in a direct democracy of the past, say in Greece,
Hmm.
um, they wouldn't necessarily be voting for every, decision that was to be made by the people in power. So you wouldn't be voting on, what they do all the time. That's still something, the secretary does. You don't need a vote to approve a specific worker into, the government if they're just a
Hmm.
secretary or something. Generally, the entire population wouldn't be voting on that issue.
I don't know
So
enough about ancient Athens really to confirm that or not, but I did know they did have a lot more say in the government than what
yeah,
we have nowadays in
currently,
um, indirect democracies.
But then they also have like spiritual like magistrates and all that weird stuff that are in charge of law. So I always found that to be I like Athenian democracy, but it's a
Well,
bit
religion was a
too
very
too.
big part
It
back
is a
yeah.
then.
big part, but like in like say in use in today, it wouldn't be so good. Cause I fucking
Well, it'd be different.
yeah.
That's probably why we don't understand it as well. It's just because it functions on different culture for
Mm.
starters, but it just functions in a different way than democracy does today with
Well,
what we're familiar with.
most nations, I believe, are secular, which is a little bit different to that, obviously.
Mm.
Hmm.
Just for those, secular is also the definition of not connected with religious or spiritual matters. So
Mm.
secular being not in the realm of spirituality, so a more materialistic take on the world.
I think a common word there for it is separation of church and state.
Mm.
Mm.
And that's, yeah, just the common theme we have in many countries today. Not in all. There are still a few countries, for example, in the Middle East, that have emphasis on religion in their country.
And the Vatican, I'm pretty sure, is considered a
Uh,
country as well.
yes,
Yeah, they
and the
are.
Vatican
Yeah.
is one of the smallest countries in the world, but still a country.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, in a system like Switzerland, could that
Hmm.
be? I mean, because I mean, it's still incredibly tiny country.
Can we
Would
upscale it?
yeah, so can we use something like say in a size of say America or Brazil?
Well, pretty much from my understanding of the Swiss system, I think the term they use is cantons or something
Mm,
as similar to that. Uh, basically, think of states. It's just basically small little sections of their country broken up. So that way, then there's a bit more representation for the minority groups who maybe live more in the countryside. So they have more equal votes with, say, the people who live in the big cities because of the population density difference.
Mm.
So if you upscale that to, let's just say America, as you said,
mm.
you can have it act very much similar to the current uh, state system where they have the what's it called, council or whatever
Yeah,
it is.
council,
Mm.
local
Yeah,
councils.
Yeah, where each of the different ones, like states, has an equal vote in some matters, but then also the less popular ones have less votes in other matters because they have less population. If you upscaled it to like something like that, it could work very well. Yeah,
Mm.
at least from what I currently understand of the system, I don't know it too well, but I can't see why not from my
Yeah.
current knowledge.
But in regards to the cantons they use, one way to look at it, if we applied it on a massive scale, is essentially having more involvement in your local government, in your council, in your local council. So, for example, in Australia, we have three main tiers there: the national scale of government, then we have the state level, and then we have our local governments, the councils, the council
Mm-hmm.
level. So essentially, one way to look at it in regards to this is you can have more direct democracy on the council level. So that way, you could make more decisions regarding infrastructure, roads, and all the things that happen on that local level. That, as I understand it, that's more what happens in Switzerland.
Yeah, I think
Of
so.
that local level. Um, but here's something I want to point out is in Australia we still have the plebiscite, referendum. We can
Mm-hmm.
that can still be called where all citizens come together and we vote on a certain issue that has been raised. For example, a few years back now, there was a vote held in regards to gay marriage, which was
Mm.
passed. But such a thing is an example of direct democracy actually happening because it's no longer us voting for, the politicians, the elected representatives to, represent us on that issue. Instead, we would give them the decision directly to vote on that issue.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense.
so we still have it, and you can still make those national level decisions with direct democracy. But as Zach was saying, you should only use it for important things, not
It's also not as common here as
yeah.
well. If you have a look at a referendum charm, Switzerland has an absolute lot more.
Mm. Well, that's it because they're also probably more used to holding those types of elections or
Indeed.
referendums, whereas in our case, we're not used to it, and it's not our tradition. I'd say that's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
If it's not our culture, why should we do it? If we're not
It's
used to it.
it's also not really taught in schools, so a lot of people find it quite foreign. I myself found it quite foreign until a couple years ago when I did delve into researching politics.
And that's what I'm saying, politics in high school.
I mean,
Mandatory. Gotta learn this
even
shit.
even primary school, I do think there's a case to be
Mm,
had there for at least teaching people how their own country works.
yeah, how the country works for sure, but
Yeah.
politics on a primary school level probably a bit
Well,
early.
no. You could actually, um,
You could, but
you
I'm
could, but
saying
in a more practical sense, like, okay, you're the leader, and also you have to elect someone or vote someone in, and that's very basic politics, but still let's learn about it. That they
in
gotta
that
You
vote.
case,
can
more hierarchy focus and team building.
Yeah.
That
yeah,
makes more sense rather
and
than
also it
politics.
I guess their feet wet a little bit before they do delve into it more deeply in terms of high school and further education.
Well, I mean, look, a lot of kids already
Oh,
do that, especially if they're playing in a sport or, when they need to elect the team leader, when they're choosing the teams that would compete with each other.
Mhm.
There's a team leader, so there is already that element there. But are you saying you'd want an actual class on it, like on how
Um,
to
I would
vote?
say yes. Like politics is really important because in a democracy, whether it's direct or indirect, people
Mm.
still vote.
Yeah,
And I
that's
feel
true.
it's very important that if people themselves have the ability to vote for their nation, in at least even the tiniest little ways, it's good for them to at least understand how their country at least works and what they're voting for and what at least a couple of the terminology mean. So then they could be a bit more well educated and actually know what they're voting for instead of just saying, oh, well, everyone, like my friends and family, votes for this party. I'll just vote for that.
I mean, that's what so many people do. I mean, it's fine.
Mm.
I'm from a Labour family. We only vote for Labour. If you don't vote for Labour, you're like weird. But more so, I had a really funny thought about teaching politics in primary school, right? So if you go a bit beyond and teaching the ideologies, I could some little kids are, yes, fascism. Oh, yes, very good,
Yeah,
Probably
very
not
good.
good to introduce radicalism there at primary school level. That might be a bit awkward.
Yeah, popping out
See,
some
and
mini Hitlers going.
see, and this is why I think, especially with politics, right? You have to be careful of when and where you introduce it into the education system,
Yeah.
because who runs schools?
Primary schools would definitely be the state, yes.
Yes, a lot of it's all in the state level, and even if it's a private school, the curriculum is directed by the government.
Yeah.
So if you have that type of politics going into schools, well, look at overseas countries like China, Russia, where they already have the politics in schools, and it's just teaching them whatever they want.
Hmm.
I think in a democratic country should leave that a little bit later for when they have their own opinions, which really, as a kid, you're better off doing it when they're a teenager, when they're a bit more rebellious, potentially even too.
Yeah, definitely when they're in their teens. There is a case for primary school, but like definitely during high school. Well, at least us three can agree.
Mm.
Now, while we're on the topic of education, what do you think about teaching, especially in high school, about other types of political government structures? Because as a democratic citizen, I think we're all a little bit biased towards democracy. We've never lived
Mm,
outside of that system.
so
So, what do you
like
think of teaching other things,
so
like
like
communism,
one
fascism,
parties
monarchies,
and
yeah,
whatnot,
one parties,
dictatorship.
Mm.
yeah, and
Um,
theocracies?
well, like I don't think it hurts. Like if you point out the pros and cons of maybe each system, why they're used and whatnot, maybe the history of them there as well. I don't think it's bad. Um, hmm. I think it's fine, especially if it's in a politics class, because democracy, although it is the most common type in the West, it's not the only form of politics in the world, obviously.
Hmm.
Mm.
And communism, socialism, particularly, is used quite frequently there as well.
What do you think, Matt?
Communism. Wait. Well, I mean, yeah, we all have our biases, but we should learn how they work, just instead of like not to be radicalized and know what's what, who's who, and just it's just generally very useful tool, I reckon. It's more so it's like, let's say our government's doing something and they're doing something a little bit weird, a little bit off, and with the political knowledge that you know from high school, but the many ideologies like, that's a pretty socialist way of conducting that operation, or that's very fascist way of doing things, or that's very capitalist. It's knowing what's what.
So even then, that doesn't necessarily translate to the voter or citizen in this case even doing anything,
No,
just
just
because
makes you
they've
more
noticed
well-rounded
something.
knowledge. And economics and politics are different, but they are closely entwined. So, learning about socialism and capitalism maybe should be for economy classes.
Yeah, well, both.
You might be able to blend the two there together.
Yeah, you could blend it, I guess.
I suppose at the end of the day, we want a balanced education system, or at least teaching style, when it comes to all these variations. Just because at least that way, if you give a variety, and you're not just focusing too much on one thing, you can give them enough to make judgment calls and
Mm,
compare the different types. And at the very
yeah,
least, if they can compare what's good, what's bad, they can probably come to the conclusion. that certain types are really bad, or at least much worse than democracy in our case. So
Mm.
I like that. That's a very logical thing to come to, anyway. Logical conclusion, in my opinion.
Mm.
So balancing it out.
So back to the original topic
Yeah,
of
which
direct and
was
indirect. So how should an average Joe know about this? How can we convey this? Because when you told the definitions out, we all
yep.
understood it, but someone
Right.
has no fucking idea in politics and go, oh, what?
I have
Well,
an idea.
I
So
must admit,
how can we
yeah,
the more how can we convey it in a much more simpler way, you think?
yeah. Can I just say that the online dictionary definitions of direct and indirect democracy aren't necessarily clear anyway? The only reason we know so much is because looking at this and researching about it beforehand.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
sorry if we may have overlooked that. What did you want to say, Zach?
In regards to how to educate or explain that to people, the differences there between the democracy systems, I think an important way and how I learnt it was to look at its origin, its roots. If you look at where democracy comes from in Greece, or
Yeah.
Athens is the main example, has the most records there about it, and you explain how they did their system, about how they got the 6,000 people, like free citizens and whatnot, to all meet up. Everyone raises their hand individually, discusses topics. You aren't allowed to like stop that person talking.
Hmm.
Everyone writes down their decisions on like little clay tablets or pots and whatnot, and then it gets voted. And then you say that's direct democracy because the populace has a direct say in most matters or all matters of the state. And then you say, look at like America or Australia, and you point out the fact that like you or me can say not vote for our economic policy or who we go to war there with or government spending or building roads. Instead, that stuff is under the responsibility of the people that we elect to be our representatives, who are the people who hopefully have the training to lead the nation in our absence and whatnot. And you can say that's representative or indirect democracy. Another thing, constitutional monarchy, which is what Australia is, also fits into that. But that's a little bit different. I'm not too knowledgeable on that. But I do believe Matthew is. So if Matt, you want to explain how to explain the difference between a republic system of sorts to a
All
constitutional
right.
monarchy, that
Yeah,
would be very different
I
for
mean,
me.
I can give it a go. I'll give it a go whack.
Yeah, just before you get into that, so to quickly summarize,
Hmm.
direct democracy, you get to vote on all the big issues yourself and the rest of the population.
Even little issues, if you're talking about
Well,
pure direct,
yeah, smaller. So
yeah,
pure democracy in that case, all
everything,
citizens, yeah, get to vote on who to go to war with, who they can marry,
yeah,
settling costs, all of those types of things.
Mm.
yeah,
And then not true democracy, or representative democracy, you vote for someone to do all that nonsense on your behalf.
yeah, in your
They get to
absence,
make the decision. Yeah, and they make the
yeah,
decision. Okay.
Mm.
Now we can switch to constitutional monarchy.
which is
Woo!
another form of indirect democracy,
Hell yeah.
or
Yes.
can be.
Can be. Depends
So
on how it's structured.
basically, there's an extra layer, and that top is the monarchy. The queen decides. Actually,
Okay.
or king in this case, queen.
Hmm.
Then the queen will bestow upon a country a governor general. So the governor general is the voice of Her Majesty or His
Hmm.
Majesty, depending. And they can actually veto and get rid of actual prime ministers. So to basically sum it up, our democracy is a privilege, not a right. Because
And
the
we've
queen can just go,
discussed this. Yeah, we've discussed this in a previous
yeah,
video where a prime minister was essentially sacked or fired
yeah,
by the governor general,
mm,
and they have that power. So essentially, the constitutional monarchy is the top power, the final say, and the parliament and the local government and all these other democratic systems where we get to vote are just below it.
Mm.
So at least in Australia, on a day-to-day, year-to-year cycle, the monarchy and the monarch has very little to do with how we run and maintain ourselves.
Mm.
The only time where they step in, or you can really see their authority, is when big things happen. If they fire someone, or if a war were to happen, that's generally the only time where you see the fact that we're still a constitutional monarchy. Everything else, we're an indirect, a representative democracy. So
Republic
you've
of
actually,
sorts.
you've combined the system.
God damn, I love republics. God damn, I love republics.
So thank you for sharing, Matthew.
Actually, this might be a good point to branch out if you don't mind. Comparing traditional republics and traditional democracies. Because nowadays the term republic is mixed in with democracy nowadays.
Mm.
So I'd like to use the terms in their traditional sense. So the system based off of Rome, republic,
Yep.
and the system based off of Greece, democracy.
Okay. Well, while we go, but we might as well. We should probably just compare modern versus
Yeah.
ancient democracies.
Well,
Mhm.
Starting with republics. Now, I'll just quickly give the definition of republic,
Mhm.
which is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and which has an elected or nominated president rather than a monarch.
Mhm.
mm.
Okay.
So
Okay, so
with
using that definition, just remember that supreme power is held by the elected representatives.
Elected head of state as well.
Yeah, and
Mm.
head of state. So the president has most of the power, and this does not mean that they actually do regular voting. It does say that the supreme power is held by the people, but that means representatively.
Voting there for representatives. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. So I guess with more older um, republics, it was definitely more class based. Because with
Mm.
Rome we had the optimates, the aristocracy, and then we have the plebs, the populares,
Mhm.
and
And then
then
the slaves.
then the slave,
They don't count. They
Ah,
don't
no,
get to
no, no
vote.
need, no need, no, yeah, but
Or
and then
women
with
for that
more,
matter.
and with more modern, so from my perspective, they sort of represent ideals instead of class based. However, you can still sort of get a feel that there is class into it. Like, for instance, we can use Australian politics, for instance. Labour definitely appeals to the more plebs, and then, say, Liberal that appeals to the more aristocracy.
In modern terms, that would be the plebs being the lower slash middle class, and
Yeah,
then the aristocracy being, upper class or high
yeah. But
middle
their
class.
their main bread and butter in a sort of modern republic is the certain ideals. Like, for instance, the Greens. They want more
Mhm.
environmentalism. Labour, they want more anti-corruption. Liberal, they want more economic. That they're three
Policies.
different policies and different ideals which people want to
Actually,
go in for.
Matthew,
Mm,
um, I just thought of something interesting. Would
yeah,
you say the reason why that shift has happened is because our representatives, which we elect, is not like the Roman method where we elect individuals, but now it's more gravitating towards parties, and parties don't exactly have a human identity, it's more the characteristics that make up the party. Like the Greens is environmentalist, or the Labour is this, and
Mm.
Liberal is that. It's more focused on the traits of said party.
yeah,
And that's why the differences happens because it's moved from people to parties, and that's why the shift has happened in terms of republics.
yeah. But more so, if you go too class-based, well, history says a lot of revolutions have happened in terms of
Yes.
the plebs uprising. So yeah, you don't want that. That's why we've like evolved or shifted into ideals, but still class, but ideals more so.
Yeah, it's not
Or at
important who the
least that
people are.
direction. At least we're going in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. People don't vote for
Because,
the people, it's the ideals behind the party.
Yeah.
well, which is a logical thing, but as we all know, charismatic politicians and leaders do collect votes, even if people may not necessarily have agreed with their party's ideals before.
Marketing can
And
also help.
yeah, and don't forget that, for example, the American structure, you're voting more so for the president, the people in their case, as I
Yeah,
understand it,
they
rather
they
than the
definitely vote for
parties. Yeah.
presidents.
So we
Yeah.
still have that variety in modern times,
Mm.
but it's certainly, I think, also easier to sort of showcase what you represent nowadays, thanks to technology. Whereas in the past, back in Roman and Greek times, you couldn't exactly live stream what were up and standing for, your candidacy.
Well, I mean, they
But,
have
advertisement,
primes.
the advertisement was just a little bit different.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was word of mouth. After all, a lot of people still couldn't read back then.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, hiring people as well is another one to do
mm,
speeches or propaganda, that kind
yeah,
of stuff. That was
Mm.
pretty rampant back then. Pretty sure they even
and
introduced laws to stop that.
yeah, what rampant advertising in the streets.
Well, like, let's say you're a really powerful, influential noble who had ties to many different people. You could easily send them out to start talking good stuff there about you
Mm,
at the bathhouses all
yeah,
around
spread
Rome or
the
surrounding
rumors
area.
and the words.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, you could easily just say, hey, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If I get into office, I'll elect you into a higher position, that kind of stuff. I'm pretty
Maybe,
sure they introduced laws to get around that.
Politics 101. Yeah.
Yeah.
maybe we should have some of those laws.
So, well, in regards to back to lawmaking and voting, I think the biggest difference between modern and ancient or older democracies is who gets to vote. Because in modern times, especially in this last century,
Mhm.
every male and female citizen can vote.
As long as they're of
That
legal age.
Yeah,
Mm.
as long as you're of legal age, which varies depending on countries.
No.
Uh, that is that exactly. Back in ancient times, that's definitely not the case. For starters, women could not vote, and it was restricted to a certain demographic, or
Free
rather,
citizens.
a certain type of citizens. So you generally you had to be a citizen for starters, and then have a certain amount of wealth. So it's sometimes, depending on which country, could have meant property, or just being a male citizen that has done their military service or whatever else that country requires. So, for example, really far back, if we're looking at the Athenian or Greek way of doing it, I think it was only roughly 20% of the population would be eligible voters, and then only a total of 10% would actually be involved in the voting process. So
Yeah.
and what that means is, for the people they get elected in, they're tailoring more to that audience, to that
Mm-mm.
smaller demographic. So the rest of the 90 or 80% of the people, the women, the slaves, the foreigners, minorities, or really really poor, they weren't necessarily a picture for the regular voting. They
Mm.
were a people that should be appeased, I suppose, but not and not antagonized. But you didn't have to go out of your way to improve their life. Whereas improving the life of the regular Roman citizens, the voting ones at least, that's how you secure your seats. So I think that shapes a lot of the policies that were made back then, as well as
Definitely.
corruption too. I just
Mm.
wanted to throw that out there if you're looking at modern democracy, because generally, if you want to get elected in, you want the voters to like you.
Appeal to the
Mm.
voters.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah,
completely
wholeheartedly
different
agree.
today than what it was back in the past.
Mm.
I'd personally say this might be a bit controversial. I'm glad everyone can vote.
Okay. I mean, if you told that to a Roman 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years,
Shame.
yeah, you're
Be
fucking
shame.
crazy. What? You're crazy. What? You're gonna let women vote? You're gonna get slaves to vote? What kind of crack are you on?
Well, actually, Mr. Lucius, we don't have slaves anymore.
No wonder your economy's failing.
Oh,
Well,
shit.
look, I think like once again we're all biased because we've been born in this in Australian democracy, and when we've been around, we've always had voting available for all. However,
Yeah.
I will say this: I think that it does change things. If you have everyone able to vote versus if you only have, a selective voter base. And the big change, I think, is taking it for granted. I think a lot of current Australian voters, as well as just voters all across the planet, take for granted the right to vote. Whereas if you have a more selective base, it's more appreciated and it's also more prestigious too. Being able to vote.
That's because not everyone has it.
Yeah,
So,
it's because
people who
not
don't
everyone
have it
has it.
seek it.
Mm.
Yeah. And if we look at America, a large population don't vote, even though they can. So, yeah, in Australia we have mandatory voting. In America we don't. You know, it comes back down to, do we want everyone to vote? Like, can everyone make an informed decision?
I mean,
Some
I think.
people will argue yes, some people would argue no.
Do you mind me chipping in here, there, Paul?
Of course.
Okay.
It's a discussion.
See, I think in regards to mandatory versus optional voting, I definitely think I'm more leaning towards optional. I
Mhm.
feel like the people who maybe don't feel like they know enough about the state that they're in and politics and whatnot, and don't really want to have their say matter too much because they don't trust it, or maybe they're just not interested at all. I feel like those people should have the ability to not have to vote. But I also think that just overall, people just need to be more well educated, so that when they do vote,
Mm.
hmm,
Mm. When they do vote.
yes,
If
if they do
they
feel
vote.
obliged.
See,
Yeah.
I'm more into mandatory. I like that. We fought for this privilege and right. Use it. It's like, so I can imagine in an alternate world where we didn't have any of that, we'd fight for it. But yeah, we have it already. So I think we got it. Use it.
Fighting for the ability there to vote that's important.
What do you
See,
think? What do you think there, Paul? What ideas are brewing in your mind there?
I mean, while we're on the topic of forcing people to vote, it's it's the same thing with conscription.
Hmm.
Some countries have it, others don't. In Australia, we don't have it. Overseas, they do, and it can be very beneficial for the citizens to actually go through conscription as well. So, for example, in national service, do 6 months. The amount of training you get, the amount of life experience for a fresh 18-year-old who's never worked a day in his life before, especially in modern times where we don't do much physical labor at all. I think that can be really beneficial.
Hmm.
So that sort of applies to that same spectrum here. Mandatory voting, yes, you're forcing people, but it can be very beneficial because you're also forcing minorities to have a say.
Hmm.
Whereas, if they didn't want to vote and they weren't voted, they don't get a say at all. And that could even, gradually lead into oppressing those types of groups. So I
Mm.
think I am leaning towards mandatory because you can sort of keep that in check. And, at times, we just got to suck it up and be forced to do something.
That is a
You
good
know,
point I didn't think
Hmm.
about.
it's like teaching a child and telling the child to not touch the hot stove. They don't know why they should not touch the hot stove yet. And once they do touch it, they'll know why. But the point is, we tell them and teach them for a reason, because it's for their own good. And I see it the same way with this type of voting. It's for everyone's best interest to just vote, like for everyone in this case.
Mm.
I see it the same way. So Zach, do you still think you have the same opinion?
Yes.
Or should we? Yeah. So don't force people to vote. Voting is an option, and that is my right.
But the thing is I'm perfectly fine with people who believe in different things. So I appreciate understanding more about the other side.
Well, I mean, the best way to solve this, right, is to literally vote, and if mandatory voting is allowed or to be used, that's the way you could solve it.
Mm.
After all, majority rules.
Certainly, certainly, certainly.
Ah, he said certainly.
So we were waiting for that. All right. Well, I'm gonna bring this up now because we should definitely considering ancient versus modern. What is your opinion on selective voting pools? We did mention it before, but back then, you had to be of a certain wealth and citizenship in order to vote, and you had to be male. So versus today, everyone can vote. Versus back then, you had to be of those three factors. Yeah, had to meet those requirements. What's your opinion on that? Because after all, back then you could argue that they had more responsible voters. Whereas today, if everyone can vote, you can have some irresponsible voting happening. And is that maybe why Hitler got voted into power? Because you had irresponsible voters?
I mean, overall, I would say my opinion is it's better, at least in my opinion, of course, that everyone there can vote in the country. The reason for that is I feel as long as you're a citizen of said country, your opinion matters, even to the tiniest extent. And you should have the ability to vote, even if you're part of the lowest minority group.
Matthew, what about yourself?
See, I get it. I get the benefits of ancient or older democracies. Like they were very refined. They're very action. They got shit done. However, I like the fact that everyone can vote. So I think I prefer modern for the fact that everyone can vote. Everyone has a say because for one, less revolutions would happen. It's like I don't want to have a revolution by my neighborhood. I'm busy chatting with you guys, and I have to constantly pop out the window. Oh yeah, no, the revolution's happening. So like,
Coming through the door.
yeah, coming through the door. Are you
Neighbor
with us or against us?
Which
You
side
know,
are
yeah,
you?
which side are you, bastard? I don't want that.
Hey,
That's
Swan,
why,
you gonna
like,
join us there for the local raid?
this is why I like that everyone can vote because it gives a lot of people of all classes, of all races, a actual say.
Mhm.
More so revolutions. I don't want to. I don't want to.
Okay, so it's mostly then to keep everything tolerant in
It
the sense
keeps the
you keep
peace.
civil. Yeah, you keep
Yeah,
civil unrest at bay.
it keeps the peace, and plus, I think with such diversity, you're able to get such diverse ideals, which could be of benefit to the country itself. If it's just the one type of person who are only able to vote, I mean, they could all be in that stigma, that little bubble, and not expanding anywhere else, and that could actually hinder an entire country. But with a major populace of all different, all the thingies, it's enabling you to give
Okay.
a grander, bigger perspective.
All right.
Yeah.
Just on this, I want to argue though, having that grander, big perspective, means everyone's divided and there's no unity. I will say that. Because if you look at a lot of democracies, you don't have the majority voting for a certain party. It's all split. 50-50 split is a common theme nowadays. So that is one negative side effect of having that. But I suppose even if you had a smaller group, you'd probably still have a 50-50 split anyway. A narrow view sees clearly. Just reminds me of that quote. Essentially, if you just keep staring at the one thing, you're going to see everything clearly on that path.
Did
Whereas
you
if
get
you're
that from
looking
40k?
around, you'll get confused. Yeah, it's a
Yeah, I'm fucking used for 40k. That sounds like 40k. Oh shit.
well, look, put it this way: a fanatic only sees what he wants to see. Whether it's good or bad is up to debate, but it's at least clear and precise. Whereas having all the contested, diverse things, it's hard to actually decide on something, which can lead to a lot of the democratic processes being slow and us slowly responding to crisis situations and emergencies. So, which in turn can just harm the country and the nation. So that's something to be aware of as well as a voter. Now, in regards to what the Athenian citizenship was, actually only citizens could vote. But if you're a citizen, you could vote. The thing is, according to them, a citizen is only, a male of that certain category. So, slaves weren't citizens and neither were females. So the thing is, technically, the way they did it is every citizen could vote. It's just they had a high standard and selective standard of what their citizen was. So I want to ask you, yes, every citizen should be able to vote, but do you think it might actually be beneficial if you sort of maybe more, made a higher standard of what it meant to be a citizen? Because, if we're born in Australia, we're citizens. We have that right. What do you think of maybe making it more of a requirement to earn that citizenship so you appreciate it? Because if you do that, you're sort of valuing the citizenship more.
I can see the point of it, but something like that in our society would get incredibly attacked. But in like an alternate sort of history thing, we gotta earn your citizenship. I get it because let's say it's like an exam or something that you have to test your intelligence in, or just overall political knowledge. You can have a more refined um, voter base, so it's not so easily corrupt.
Or at
Swayed and
least more
influenced.
informed.
At least someone who's more well informed. I get that. So logically, it makes sense. Morally and ethically,
by modern standards, yeah.
by modern standards, so many people would attack that, and
Well,
yeah,
but isn't that the reason why the ancients were able to have, in that case, a more logical and potentially better system? Is because they had different morals, they had different standards, so they
I
were
mean, I
able
would
to
have
use it.
to disagree somewhat with that there, Paul. If we use, say, Greece as an example of a political nation of sorts, how I view Greece, and obviously I'm not from there, so I don't know that for certain, but if you look at how many intellectual discussions and innovations were happening in the area, I would say that's mostly because how free and open people were to discuss amongst each other, but also the fact that politics was really well talked in the agora, public places, that kind of stuff. Everyone talked openly about this stuff, and because of that, people placed an importance on politics just in daily life, daily stuff. And because of that, people naturally get more well informed, more well educated, and because of that, it makes that system and that culture like that. I don't think it's because they separated people in the different voting classes or whatnot, or because ancient morals were different. I think it's just the fact that the ancients in Greece, particularly, placed great importance on everyone talking amongst each other, that kind of stuff.
But wasn't that because they had a more selective voter pool? You know, because they appreciated the ability to talk politics and actually vote on it?
I mean,
Isn't that why?
I can understand why you would think that, but I personally have to disagree. I think the main reason why they do that is because the public meeting place, after everyone's done their jobs and whatnot, just allows really good open conversation between people. And as you know, once you get a couple of the mates there around, people start talking about stuff they're interested in or stuff that's been happening around on TV or politics or whatnot. And that kind of atmosphere breeds political discussion, especially back then. I don't think it has anything really to do with the class system.
So you're saying it's more of a cultural thing then,
It's
in that
definitely a
sense?
cultural thing.
Yeah.
As an example, let's say people in like Australia were more politically interested, right? In Australia, people don't care about politics. I don't think that's something unagreeable. I'd say it's pretty factual. Most people don't, and they're also not well educated there on it. But let's pose a hypothetical where they were, right? Where they had a more Greek cultural mindset on being open amongst each other, right? You could go to the shopping center and in line you can have a conversation, even a short one there with the person about their political beliefs or their morals and ethics and that kind of stuff. That kind of environment breeds innovativeness and whatnot, and openness amongst people and closeness. And that culture, I feel personally, is good.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, of course. But I feel it's that cultural aspect that had to do with the Greeks' ability to do
Yeah.
politics, not a class system.
Okay. Well, I say I completely agree on the fact that it was the Greek culture that affected most of that in regards to the interactions for voting. But I think that the hierarchy and the politics heavily shaped the culture. And if they had a culture, well, rather a hierarchy like we had today, no slaves, full rights, equal rights between men and women, you would not have seen the same culture. I don't think that would have happened. I
It
think
would have
that,
been different
yeah,
there for sure.
it would have been different, but I don't think you'd have had the same type of, politically interested and open dialogue culture,
It is
or at least not for as
possible,
long. Oh, of course it's
but
possible, but that's
it is
just what I think.
impossible to tell.
Yeah, we can't. But it was definitely a product of the political hierarchy they had back then. So at least to some extent, they were linked.
Mm.
By God, I love the Athenian society. I can just walk up to around and go, "Oi, I want to discuss politics with you." Go, "Gore's right there. Let's go." Or it's like, "I don't like you. I don't like your views.
You
Let's
know, the
go to the
perfect
Agora."
place Perfect
Agora.
place to do this in the Australian society be introduce this to a bar setting. But maybe you'll be a bit too intoxicated there, might be a bit too violent.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. Overseas in Austria, I
Hmm.
know they do talk more politics just in general.
It must just be a
Um,
European thing.
I think it is a European thing because, like, look at Germany, the beer hall putsch.
Hmm.
They're just talking politics in some random beer place, beer hall. So it definitely heavily cultural aspect there.
Do they teach
Beer
politics
hall.
during school in Austria or Germany or other European nations?
So I wouldn't know. I do know they have. Uh, it's like similar in the sense we learn more on geography and politics and history, but instead of it being about Australia, it's all about Europe. And Europe has a
Mm,
lot more rich history, especially in the political and democratic side. So
yeah,
so you just have more of that in the background.
you
But
learn
if they
more
have
about the foundational stuff.
yeah, if they have like a specific course on politics in their general education system, I wouldn't know.
I see, I see. Mm.
Certain man
Uh,
used beer halls to spread his
yeah, yeah.
ideology.
Well, and
Germany
that's
definitely did love spreading
Yeah.
the.
for
So
those that
if
don't know,
we
Google beer hall putsch.
so if we look at those beer halls that you're talking about
Yeah. Okay.
in
What about
Germany,
them?
where it definitely seems like the possibility for people to drink and discuss politics is a thing. It has been done in Europe.
Well, yeah,
Mm.
it could be done anywhere, but I think
It's
it's
cultural.
yeah.
I mean, cultural does affect it. I mean, look at America. They discuss a lot of politics too.
Mm.
However, it's way more toxic. Way more toxic. Like, let's say Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. If you're like discussing Donald Trump in a Hillary Clinton area, bam! You know, like they get violent. Instead of like openly discussion, like openly discuss about it, they just flog you.
It's funny. Well,
Well,
it's
I
a
mean,
form of communication,
yeah,
you
but I
know,
mean,
violence.
it has its positives and it has its negatives. It really depends on how you go about it. With
Mm.
Europe, you know, it's much more chill.
Well, I think that's probably because they've spent the past few hundred or thousands of years killing each other because they all had different points of view.
Yeah, they're kind of
So
over it by now.
yeah,
Yeah, they're
they
really
kinda
sick of
like,
I
war,
got it out
you
of the
know.
yeah,
system.
we've done this, let's take a break. Just relax. Yeah. We'll have another great schism in 100 years anyway. Just have another religious war. Another revolution in 50.
Oh, lovely
Europe in a
revolutions.
nutshell. Well, look, we've talked a lot about the different types, as well as the benefits, what we think about selective and open for all voting. I think overall we can agree that having elections open to everyone is just a much more comfortable environment to live in. It's a lot more relaxed, even if it's not as efficient or beneficial in like war-like situations. It's certainly more relaxed, and the life and ease of living. It's just so much more plebeian.
We'll play there.
Yeah, it's more pleb.
Uh,
It's just all
there's a
around
bit more
cushy.
security for the lower classes, which is probably why it gives off that
Mm.
feel.
Hmm. I mean, the same thing with the aristocracy. They just want to chillax from all the fucking revolutions. It's just
Well,
like, oh,
that's
we've been through so many revolutions. Like, oh my god, right, fucking ego, get your power, fuck off.
well, and the good news is like it's a good way to maintain their authority
Hmm.
if they avoid revolutions by giving occasional concessions. So it's certainly useful.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's beneficial for them to maintain this type of giving them like the plebs a little bit of leeway occasionally when it's getting too oppressive for them because it maintains a status quo,
Hmm.
and no revolutions means a lack of bloodshed, which I think makes everyone happier.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true.
All right. So, Zach, was there
Hmm.
anything you wanted to say in particular about democracy or selective citizens
Mm, a
being
while
able to
ag-
vote?
a while ago, I was very much leaning towards republics.
Hmm.
And as I read more about other types of politics from people like Machiavelli and whatnot, I started to understand the benefits of one party systems, although I personally didn't subscribe to that idea as my preferred. But I would say with my more recent research on pure democracies, its origins, and especially in regards to how Switzerland does things, I don't know too much about it, obviously, but just from what I do know, I'm currently in love with that way of running countries. I
Okay.
personally think it combines the best aspects of both a direct and indirect democracy into something that is really well combined.
Mm.
I would say that'd be my preferred way of running countries and whatnot at the moment with my current
Uh,
knowledge.
Hmm.
what's that? And your knowledge will continue to grow and develop as
You
you
know,
research more and just different life experience, maybe you'll come across something which will drastically change your worldview.
I mean, very much a possibility. I mean, I can't predict the future, obviously. But I do plan on researching more about how Switzerland does things, and maybe Germany and whatnot there as well. Apparently, they have aspects of it.
Might have to join you on that one. Do a bit of a joint thing.
Possibly.
Always
So,
seems
so
interesting.
Matthew,
Yeah.
what do you think then, going off of Zach's theme there, what kind of ideal democracy do you see?
Ideal
Country?
political system. How about that?
Yeah.
A bit more
My
deeper
my idea.
question.
Well, I've already expressed my love for republics. I think they work. I think they're lovely. Um, in terms of democracy, we definitely should lean to more republic. In my humble opinion, that we should
Yeah.
go more republic side of democracy. In my unbiased,
Would you say it's because you're a Roma
educated.
boo?
Shut up. No.
I
I mean, Rome was proof that it worked.
mean,
Ish.
debatable.
Well, they
That's why I
lasted
said
a long
ish.
time.
Fuck off. But the concept of republics really appealed to me. The fact that there could be multiple people representing completely radically different ideologies, doing different things. I like that. It's refreshing. Instead of just having the one party just going about it, just the one thing. It can be like one term, fucking environmentalism, it's like, for the environment, change carbon emissions, and then next term, military! I like that. It's very refreshing, that difference, that switch. I really like
it's
Hmm.
that.
it's flexible to the needs of the people at the time.
Plus, I think with republics, they can respond to crisis a bit easier as well
Ancient, definitely.
because of all the different ideologies and
Hmm.
just overall dispersion of power. It's really,
Yeah.
really good. I mean, Rome controlled all those provinces, and they were fucking
Hmm.
good at it because they were a republic. They can just assign people like that. Yeah,
And they could
that,
also reassign people
mm,
if they were too corrupt
and
or
they could
too
reassign
incompetent.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that. What about you, there, Paul?
Uh, so me
Oh, here we
personally,
go. Here's a bit of controversy coming in.
say, look, well, going off of what you were saying though, I like a certain amount of adaptability
Can you speak
in
English
a
there, Paul?
government.
Well, maybe you might know the German word there for it.
Yeah. Um, but let's call it flexibility of a government. If it's too rigid, it's just going to be destroyed by an outside force. So no matter how nice it is, if it's too weak to outside power and defending its interests and its rights, it's just going to be destroyed and replaced with something which could be much worse than like a really bad democracy. It could be something much worse that comes
Perfect
along.
example of
The
that is
Nazi
the
Germany.
perfect example of that there, Paul, is Athens itself. Its direct democracy got taken over by an
Mm,
oligarchy, I believe, because military takeover.
that's it.
Yeah.
So I believe that an ideal country has that sort of balance, balancing, a really good running regime that is, really great for its citizens, but can also protect itself, which at times requires, sacrifices from the regime itself and from the citizens, like conscription, for example. So using that combination, I'd say an ideal structure would be a combination of democracy and some kind of more stronger authoritarian style, for example like a republic where you have say like a president who has emergency powers when a war happens, because he can do what needs to be done or she can do what needs to be done when something happens. If you don't have those authorities, if you don't have those systems in place, it can just collapse. So you might as well have something that might be a little bit, tougher, bit more oppressive, but at least it will last. Because if you get taken over by someone else, generally a lot of people die when that happens. So you're better off having that there in the first place and keeping the peace, because the peace preserves the most amount of life, in my opinion. Probably
Mm-hmm.
also if you look at the facts too, considering wars causes deaths. So yeah, my ideal would be a combination of democracy and some kind of controlling authoritative figure, whether it be a constitutional monarchy, a republic, like elected dictator, like the Romans had in case of emergency, whatever it may be. I believe a combination is best.
Yeah, it covers the weaknesses and strengths of
Yeah.
both.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. So
Alrighty.
Matthew,
Yeah.
say, how long have we gone for?
We have gone for nearly an hour. 6:58.
Okay. Well, I think this is about the time to wrap it up then,
Wrap it
before we
up.
keep
Alright, so
going on.
we've made our closing statements, what we
Mm,
like and prefer. Well, I guess thank you very much, Zach, for attending.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for
yeah.
having me.
No worries.
All right. Until
Alright.
next time, and
Until next
just
time.
just remember, everyone. As biased as we are living in a democratic country, thus far, it is arguably the least shittiest system that we've come across. That is the most tolerant and probably the nicest to live in. So keep that in mind if you come across some great sounding, one party fascist structure or communist structure. Just keep in mind, the death toll that
Mm,
has happened in the past. And that's why democracy tends to be overall the nicer country or
mm.
system to live under. So keep that in mind. All right.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much, all the viewers watching. Have a good one.
Bye bye.